there, episode 4, Idiot Wind, blustering our way through the collected works of Bob Dylan, as presented in Dylan Vinyl, the definitive collection. And in a remarkable turn up for the books, episode 4 is actually his 4th album. This is the first time that's happened. The number of the episode is the same as the number of the album. How exciting. And yet again, I think we can say, we'll talk about it a bit in a minute, but this is rubbish, this magazine. This magazine is almost entirely uninformative about this record. So the 4th album, that's him, that's the man. Bob Dylan is now a star. He's writing hit songs for himself and for others. He's written and released Blown in the Wind and The Times They Are A-Changin'. And he's got a manager, Albert Grossman, who's realised he's a tremendous force commercially. And Grossman and Columbia Records have realised one thing about this very culturally important, distinctive songwriter, and that is they can make loads of money out of him. So his first album, recorded a couple of years before this, took 6 hours to record, 2 consecutive 3-hour afternoon sessions. Bob Dylan's success has earned him the right on this, his 4th album, to make this album in 1 6-hour session. He starts off at 7:30 in the evening, and by 1:30 a.m. the next morning, this album is finished. Whereas the first album was mainly songs he played live with a couple of his own originals. All 11 tracks on this are written by Dylan, and very few of them have ever been played live. They're written to be recorded because Columbia and Grossman, who is both his publisher and his manager, and Columbia are, of course, his record company, want to get these songs published and released. Now, I think this is an important album in many ways. It's the end of an era. This is the last record for a long time we'll hear Bob Dylan on his own with just himself, his harmonica and his acoustic guitar. That sort of thing is going to stop very soon. So this is the last chance to see the solo Dylan. I think it's about 3 decades later he does this again, and that is with an album of entirely cover versions, not his material at all. So this is the last album he makes on his own, with his own songs. And as ever in this period, it's another transitional album. Suze Rotolo, who's been the leading lady of a lot of these songs, is also very heavily featured on this album. There'll be very personal albums later on, but this is one of the most personal albums Bob Dylan ever made, almost on the same level as something like Blood on the Tracks, which we'll come to down the line. But there's at least 3 songs on this that concern Suze Rotolo. And unfortunately for Suze Rotolo's sister, Carla, there are a couple of songs that reference her. And as she's obviously a woman Dylan evidently despises, that's not very pleasant experience for her, and indeed for many listeners. But first of all, Sid, my companion Sid Smith, what did you think of this? You've not heard this album before, had you?
I as ever with Bob Dylan, it was the first. I played the album yesterday, I think, for the first time.
I saw you on Facebook saying that.
And it was the first time of hearing these songs in sequence. But of course, being Bob Dylan, several of these songs were familiar to me. I think I first heard, obviously, The Byrds. All I Really Want to Do is Make Friends. Yeah. I mean, I remember hearing that, sometime in the 60s, and it was then and now a gorgeous, gorgeous sound. And so it's interesting hearing, the thing sort of in its original form and stripped back. My overall impression, though, of the album, and there was a couple of other tracks, which I knew. One from an Al Stewart album called Orange, which I was very fond of when it came out. I had a period of big passion for listening to Al Stewart in the sort of early 70s, and I think the album Orange he does a cover of I Don't Believe You and whatever the rest of the title song is. And in many respects, again, it's quite an upholstered version of that song compared to the original. Similarly with My Back Pages, which I knew primarily, if I knew it at all, it was primarily through this album, which is The Nice.
Oh, really?
Nice. Which apart from, it's got a great Hypnosis cover.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it is, and shot no Photoshop, obviously shot in the desert, all the blah 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 blah. And of course, the thing with The Nice doing Bob Dylan was on that American tour, which this album Elegy kind of documents. One of the problems The Nice had was they didn't really have many songs, and so they would co-opt Bob Dylan songs. Lee Jackson's voice is actually quite similar to Bob Dylan's raspy kind of sandpapery sort of whine, and so in that sense that it's a good fit. And the version of My Back Pages on Elegy, and when they were doing it on other live dates, has the benefit, it seems to me, of Lee Jackson does a little bit of editing. Instead of coming in with verse 1, he starts the business at verse 2 and 3, and then the rest of the song is used as a leaping off point for various keys.
They edit the words then. How about what's their musical approach? Is that pared down as well?
Well, their musical approach is it goes for a maximalist approach, which takes it, which unpacks the song and extrapolates 1,000 multiverses of what might be possible within My Back Pages. And actually, as I say, I don't think when I first heard that album, circa 1971 or whenever it came out, I don't think I knew it was a Bob Dylan song. I will have read on the cover it was a Bob Dylan song, but I won't have ever heard the Bob Dylan song at the time. And similarly with the Al Stewart version, I knew it was a Bob Dylan song, but I'd never heard the Bob Dylan version. So listening to that in the last couple of days was simultaneously a bit of kind of, when you recognize something, but you're hearing it for the first time. So that was interesting. Overall, I get what you're saying about the speed at which this was recorded. Recorded in one whole session, and I don't know. I mean, I think that's kind of fairly obvious. I think you can tell it was recorded.
Yeah, so do I. Yeah,
because I think, in strict terms, the performance sometimes leaves a lot to be desired in terms of its timekeeping and arrangement. The arrangements of the songs in a solo format, they're often quite dull and static. Having said that, and you can hear various points where Dylan's laughing.
I was going to mention that.
And there's a bit of in-jokery there. I mean, I don't know who was in the sessions with him, in the room with him, but there's obviously a bit of laughing and carrying on going on, all of which is good. And I actually, for all I've just said, the performances are a bit erratic. I guess that's what Bob Dylan fans want. They want that kind of unevenness because it's part of the whole genius thing. It sort of wears a bit thin for me after a while, and I kind of not all of the songs particularly work that well for me. That said, there are one or two great moments on the album. I won't deny that, and it works in its own terms. I think it works very well. I think the only quick observation I would make is, again, it's interesting. What was the album that we talked about which had an insert? Was that The Times They Are Changing?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was the first one we did.
So on the back of, I mean, first of all, this album cover's terrible.
It's by. I was going to say,
like
the last two before this have had really polished covers,
yeah.
And this looks like the album. Quick, we've got to get an album out.
Yeah,
and the title as well.
Yeah,
Dylan hated this title, particularly despised this title, and that was Tom Wilson, the producer.
Yeah.
This is the last album. Dylan won't choose the title,
but I quite enjoyed the poem on the other side. And when I say I quite enjoyed it, it reminded me so much of reading, of getting into the beat poets and getting into Kerouac and Ginsberg and Ferlinghetti and all of that crowd. So it took me back to that, so I was doing that sort of probably in the mid-70s, I guess. I was discovering all these artists from the 1940s and 1950s in much the same way that I would imagine Dylan was or had done.
Yeah.
So these sort of American touchstones of alternative culture, and there's a great rolling freedom in this stuff. I'm not sure if it's any good. But as somebody once said about I think Kerouac, it's not so much writing as typing, but on its own it works well enough.
On the subject of this, even though I've subsequently discovered they're in the collected lyrics, I'd never read this before because I've never had this record on vinyl. So if you look at the I've got a reproduction and from the mono box of this album, and you can't really, it's tiny. You need an electron microscope to read that. And I think in the other booklet, they might be a bit bigger, but having it 12 by 12, I just read them, and I think it's like the album. I think some passages of this are extraordinarily good.
Yeah,
and there's quite a bit of filler as well.
Yeah.
So there are shafts of really striking use of language, and then there's a bit of doggerel in between, and then there's another shaft of brilliant writing. You talk about Ginsberg. This album was recorded about 5 weeks or so after he met Ginsberg for the first time, and they became friends for the rest of the Ginsberg's life. Really, they were close friends. Most of these songs were written in a week, and that's the impression I get. You were saying you can tell it's recorded in 6 hours. You can also tell that Wilson and Dylan haven't got much time to think about what's going on this record. There are multiple other songs also recorded in those 6 hours, and they choose these, but some of them, quite frankly, aren't good enough. I mean, I don't know how often he performed Motor Psycho Nightmare, the track that opens side 2, but I'm willing to guess.
I really loved that. I thought that was
great.
Did you? I thought it was so funny.
Yeah, it is funny, but it's this side of him that slightly jars with me on the early albums. He is a very funny person, but there's this desperate need to be funny on some of these songs, and it's getting a bit laboured, I think.
I tell you what, though. What was interesting was Motorcycle Nightmare or whatever it's called. As I say, I mean, I laughed out loud. I actually laughed out loud at some of the lyrics, and it's a variation on a very old folk song,
Yeah.
So credit to him for updating it into sort of 1960s Americana or 1950s Americana, as it probably would be. But you know what? I actually preferred that to the Chimes of fucking Midnight.
Freedom, is it?
No, Chimes of Midnight.
Obviously, everyone's welcome to their own opinion on this stuff. There's no right and there's no wrong on artistic matters, but you're fucking wrong there. I mean, Motorcycle Nightmare, a song he never played live. That's how much he thought of that. And I also think, I think Black Crow Blues is a trivial song. I think that's just throwing a few blues cliches over a piano. What we got next?
Next you'll be telling me that you don't like I Shall Be Released number 10 or whatever it is.
I Shall Be Free number 10. You've got the songs written down, Sid, on a printed list there. I think you should refer to that if you're trying to impress the Bobcats. Also, I think Champs of Freedom is a bloody remarkable song and the best song on this album. I've preempted our ending there, haven't I? But I think All I Really Want to Do and You Take Me, Babe are great songs, the ones that start and finish the album. I think they're great songs, but they're like cheeky doodles in a sense. I think Charms of Freedom is a masterpiece. I think To Ramona, which is Goodbye to Suze Rotolo, is a goodbye with split up song. I think that's lovely, a lovely lyric, and it's a really intimate performance. I think My Back Pages is a very good song, and it's got that classic refrain of
yeah, brilliant.
I was much older then. I'm younger than that now.
Yes.
And then I think you get this last three songs. It Ain't Me, Baby, we've already dealt with, but I Don't Believe You, You Act Like We've Never Met. That's a Suze Rotolo song. And he mentions someone foaming at the mouth in that song. And that's a reference to her sister, Carla. And that becomes quite unpleasantly obvious on Ballad in Plain D, which I actually think, the more I listen to it, is quite a good song, but he gets far too personal about the sister in that song. He calls her your parasite sister, for whom I had no respect. Yeah. And that's based on the final row, where he went round to see Suze and Carla's there, and it gets pretty heated, the row, and Carla intervenes on her sister's behalf, and then Dylan turns his very sharp tongue on her, and while Suze apparently sits silent, almost catatonic, in the bed with the covers over her, wishing the whole thing would just stop. And he goes back and he writes that song.
I know
it's quite venomous about Carla, particularly.
There were several points during that song where I was just wanting it to stop. I thought it was a pathetic excuse for a song. I really did.
Did you? That's interesting.
Yeah, and for me, it gives the it encapsulates for me the problems I have with Bob Dylan. It's fine, it's fair enough to write a song and have a go at people and all the rest of it. I've got no problem with that. But I question how sharp and kind of insightful it is after 8 minutes, and it's just more of the same, laboring and layering on, and loads of making excuses for himself.
Yes. There's only one time he admits any blame for himself, and the blame for him in that relationship is pretty high,
Even then, he doesn't really admit the blame.
No,
he sort of there's some mealy mouth. But anyway, for me, that's it came at the end of the album, or nearly the end of the album, and thank God in a way, because I don't think I would have made it through the rest of it. It just goes on and on, and
I think it's sorry,
go on.
I think it's an ill-considered, small-minded, petty song.
Yeah,
and I don't think he's, I don't think it's a song worthy of being on the album. I don't think he should have put it on the album, and I think the only reason it is on the album is that they're working at this rush. There's a couple of tracks that shouldn't be on the album.
I think. I mean, I don't know anything about the making of the album and what went on in the decision making, but my guess is for a song as substantial as that, the fact that it's on the album is because Bob wanted it on the album.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, that moment, but you see, they've got 6 hours. They've not really got time to think about it, have they? And he's still furious at this stage. But he shouldn't. It shouldn't be on the album. It just shouldn't be. But one of the songs you mentioned, "Chimes of Freedom," that's a remarkable song. That's a new stage in his writing, and that he's not a protest singer in that song. He's moved on from that. There's no song on this album that's a protest song, which is remarkable when you think that the one before was "The Times They Are A-Changing." That song is not protesting about any issue. It's a song of compassion and empathy and concern for people, generally, universally. A couple taking shelter in a church under a spectacular thunderstorm, which makes him think of all the oppressed and impoverished people of the world. And I've always loved the third verse, which starts with the lines, through the mad mystic hammering of the wild ripping hail, the sky cracked its poems in naked wonder. And I think that's just magical. I mean, who else writes a third verse starting with those 2 lines? And I don't know, I think that's the use of language in that song and the general empathy and compassion of it. It seems to come from a different mind than that produced Ballad in Plain D. You think the bloke who wrote Ballad in Plain D isn't the bloke who wrote Chimes of Freedom. It's like a different view of the world entirely, and that's why
it's almost like there's another side of Bob Dylan.
Yeah, and I will say, just to mention your conceptual point there, they're on different sides of the album, aren't they? So this thing is like a hall of mirrors. Yeah.
The thing about the Chimes of Freedom is, for me, I reckon. See, I don't have any investment in it, but I recognised that I was listening to something that was weighty and ponderous and serious. And because of that, I sort of thought to myself, actually, I think I preferred this when Donovan wrote "Catch the Wind," which seems to me was a huge lift from Chimes of Freedom. But there was,
I don't know that song. Catch the Wind.
To my ears, I mean, Chimes of Freedom's recorded in '64, I think, and Catch the Wind is recorded or released in '65. And of course, Donovan, I mean, Donovan had a hit with it, obviously, in this country. But what surprised me was he had a pretty big hit with it in the United States as well, where there was obviously an appetite for people wearing little caps and guitars and harmonicas.
Appetite for Bob Dylan and people imitating him.
Well, it's an interesting area to go into, I guess. But for me, there was on the one hand, the Donovan song is clearly a bit of a knockoff, it seems to me, and I don't say that with any axe to grind against Donovan. It just sort of seems like there's an obvious point of inspiration there. There may not be. I don't know. I've never interviewed Donovan to ask him, but in a way, I actually prefer the lightness of the Donovan thing, because it's light and it's a bit fluffy. The Chimes of I know this is like probably heresy to say it, but I just sort of thought here's a man who's stuck in the middle of having to write something portentous and serious, and so he does a good job of it. But it feels very laboured to me.
No, you see, I don't know. I think it's it's the best song on this album by miles.
Well, apart from blowing our format wide open by revealing your
iconoclastic.
Pyroclastic, did you say?
Iconoclastic, I said.
All right. Okay.
Not pyroclastic. We're not to that album yet.
So there we are. I think that there's album number 4 in the series, and there's a bit of a controversy opening up there.
Well, this is what I thought it to be every week. I thought every week this is going to be Sid picking some trivial bit of stuff that Bob's just dashed off as his favourite track, and then slagging off some genuine classic. But this is we got to episode 4 without it happening. I'm really impressed. What was your favourite track on this album?
Well, I did think about that, knowing that you would be asking me this, and I was tempted to go with. There was a couple actually, which I thought I thought I really like this. It's lovely stuff. And the one that I've the ones that I liked, I liked My Back Pages.
Yeah, I did very much. Yeah.
Primarily because of that line. That lyric, and because I'd had the association, I'd had a relationship with the song, and similarly with "I Don't Believe You" or whatever it's called. That
we never have met. It's called "I Don't Believe You."
I don't believe you. So I'd had a relationship with that song before, and of course, "All I Really Want to Do," which I think is a gorgeous song. And actually, I didn't mind the performance on this one. It has a certain charm to it. Yeah, and I'd be interested to know where in the 6-hour session that came. Was it at the beginning or the middle? I
suspect it was a bit later on by the sound of it. because he is singing quite delicate words at one point, and he just bursts out laughing. He nearly bursts out laughing, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does.
Strangely, there's a moment on "Rough and Rowdy Ways" from last year where he's singing a song called "False Prophet," and it's a very ominous blues background, and he sings, I'm an enemy of a unlived, meaningless life. I'm the enemy of strife. I'm the enemy of the unlived, meaningless life, which is a really, as you say, portentous line. And he nearly cracks up while he's singing it. And I just think, they've just kept that in.
But the track that I eventually decided to go for is "It Ain't Me, Babe," which I just think is a great. I know it's a well-known Dylan song, although I think this was one of the first times that I'd actually sat and listened to this version of it. I think it's a great "fuck you" sort of song. And it does it in all the ways that the song that precedes it, "Song in
Plain D."
It's got such a good lightness of touch in a way that song doesn't have. And it's unlabored, and it sounds quite heartfelt. But the other thing about it is its brevity. It manages to say so much about what I imagine Dylan was feeling about his position in the world, about the fact that he was seen as betraying, when he was coming away from the protest songs, being derided as a bit of a fair weather traveller kind of thing. It just had a beautiful succinctness to it. And Dylan, when he's at his best, and I do admire many aspects of Dylan's work, but when he's at his best, he's also has a conciseness about him which is all too rare for me in Dylan's music. And so "It Ain't Me, Babe" is, as I say, it's a great fuck off song.
And I think you're right. I think it seems to be a relationship song, and it does cover a lot of the ground that some of the more bitter songs, the more unpleasant song. I think "Ballad in Plain D" is basically an unpleasant song. That's a trial to sit through because of the small-mindedness and bitterness of it. Whereas there's no small-mindedness and there's no bitterness in "It Ain't Me, Babe."
No.
And it covers that kind of stuff wittily.
Yeah.
With this lightness of touch. But it is also, as you say, he's already getting fed up with being called the spokesman of a generation. He's getting fed up with people saying, "No, you're this. You should do this."
Yeah.
And it always bugs him. And people start to call him, this is the word, prophet as well. And it really upsets him.
Yeah.
And he ends the album with this thing you want me to be. It ain't me, babe.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's a marvelous sign off of the album.
Yeah. It's the life of Brian in song.
Yeah, that's what it is. That's a brilliant way of putting it. It is very, very witty, and it says what it needs to say. Goes straight in and says it and finishes, as you say.
Says it in 3 minutes.
I didn't realise Ballad in Plain D was as long as that. And I have sat listening to it, and I don't feel the weight of these things like you obviously do. But that's way too long for that song. If that's 8 minutes long,
absolutely,
it's nowhere near worth that amount of time. I think he should have.
I think the quick. I don't want to sort of prolong the discussion too much about it, but it does raise an interesting point about living your life in public, or at least giving the impression of living your life in public.
Yeah, that's more like it.
There are all sorts of songs which I'm sure people have written, and you know, on reflection, you think, just like in real life, you know, you kind of sort of say, maybe I shouldn't say that, or maybe I shouldn't have said that. He doesn't get the choice, unfortunately, and I dare say, you know, at the time, I think he definitely wanted that song on the album because he had a message to get out there, and the message wasn't a message to the masses. Message was aimed at a very select audience, and the rest of us are just collateral damage.
Yeah, we're not even in the equation.
No.
The listener is not in the equation, and sometimes that's a great thing about him. Sometimes the bloke who won't listen to what people want him to be is great because of that. But sometimes you've got to think that all the ire in that song, all the vitriol, it doesn't mean anything beyond that situation. It doesn't mean anything to anybody else. And he's just trying to upset Suze Rotolo's sister. That's what he's trying to do. And I think it's a very petty song.
Yeah.
And for that, I can never really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, I think we agree on that. Although, but what's interesting about this album is just on the varying. For me, this is the first Bob Dylan album in our sequence that I've thought, right, this is where I start having problems with Bob Dylan. Whereas with the others, actually, you know, albums 1 to 3, you know, I know we listened to them out of sequence, but actually I didn't have much of a problem with any of them. But I think for me, the difficulties with Bob start here.